I'm a 26-year-old woman, and I finally managed to snag my own apartment a few months ago. It was a big deal for me, being able to ditch the long commute and have my own space. My parents even helped me out with the move and getting the place furnished. Everything was perfect, peaceful, quiet, just the way I liked it. Then, 6 days ago, my mom calls me up with this amazing idea. Apparently, my 23-year-old cousin Alex is starting a new job near my place, and my mom, in her infinite wisdom, told my aunt that Alex could just crash at my place. Without asking me, of course. Now, Alex and I used to be close when we were younger, but he turned into a bit of a jerk in high school. Arrogant, self-centered, the whole 9 yards. So, yeah, I wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of him moving in. But my mom, she can be incredibly persuasive. She started going on about how they helped me with the apartment and that this was the least I could do for the family. And before I knew it, I was agreeing to let him stay. I tried to set some ground rules, like splitting the rent, but my mom insisted she'd cover it. It felt ridiculous, but she wouldn't budge. I figured, fine, whatever. He'll be out at work most of the time anyway. Boy, was I wrong. The first day Alex moved in, I knew I was in trouble. He spent the entire day at the apartment, and by the time I got home from work, the place looked like a bomb had gone off. Clothes everywhere, dirty dishes piled up, video game controllers scattered across the floor. I was fuming. I told him to clean up his mess, and he did. But with this annoyed look on his face like I was the one inconveniencing him. It was like high school all over again. The next couple of days were torture. He was constantly blasting music, yelling into his phone while playing video games, and ordering takeout. The only saving grace was that he actually started cleaning up after himself after that first day explosion. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just kick him out? Trust me, I wanted to. But my mom had guilt-tripped me into this whole thing, and I didn't want to cause a huge family drama. Plus, he was supposed to start working soon, so I figured I could just grit my teeth and bear it until he was out of the house most of the time. Finally, on the third day, Alex started his new job. We both got home around the same time, and for the first time since he'd arrived, the apartment was actually clean. He ordered more takeout, I made myself dinner, and we both went to our rooms. It was the first peaceful day I'd had since he moved in, and I started to think maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be so bad after all. Yeah, that didn't last long. The next day, I got stuck in traffic and came home a little later than usual. When I walked in the door, I couldn't believe my eyes. My living room was overrun by a bunch of guys in suits, ties loosened, top buttons undone, looking like they owned the place. And get this, they were drinking my expensive wine. The one I was saving for a special occasion. I was already pissed, but then Alex sees me and casually tells me he invited some coworkers over for drinks. He even had the nerve to tell me to grab another bottle of wine from the cabinet. One of his buddies actually suggested I should have stocked up on beer instead. They all thought this was hilarious. I was seeing red. I snapped at Alex, telling him he had perfectly good arms and legs and could get the damn wine himself. I may have also mentioned that since he wasn't paying rent, he could at least ask before inviting a bunch of strangers over to trash my place. You could have heard a pin drop. They all just stared at me in stunned silence. I felt a tiny bit of satisfaction, but mostly I was just furious. I stormed off to my room, slammed the door, and immediately called my mom. I told her I couldn't take it anymore, that Alex was a disrespectful slob, and I wanted him out. But, of course, she started with the emotional blackmail. She couldn't kick him out. It would ruin her relationship with my aunt, blah blah blah. She guilt-tripped me, saying I'd already embarrassed him enough in front of his friends. In the end, she wore me down. She promised that he'd move out as soon as he got his first paycheck at the end of the month. I didn't like it, but I agreed. What else could I do? After the wine incident, Alex and I basically avoided each other. He'd come home from work and shut himself in his room. I barely saw him, which was fine by me. Then, today, I get a call from my aunt. Apparently, Alex had been complaining to her that I only cooked for myself and did my own laundry without offering to do his. And get this, she actually called me to demand that I start cooking and cleaning for him. She went on this whole rant about how I'm older than him, so I should be looking out for him. like I was his mother or something. She said he wasn't used to doing those things himself, and she didn't want him to overwork himself or get sick from eating takeout. I was speechless. This woman actually expected me, a working woman, to babysit her adult son. I told her flat out that I wasn't his mother, and she could either take him back home or let him learn to take care of himself like the rest of us. Of course, she didn't take that well. She started lecturing me about being a good sister and how I should be more protective of Alex. She even called him a sweet boy who deserved to be looked after. Sweet boy. This is the same guy who threw a party at my place without asking and then treated me like a servant. I decided to burst her bubble. I told her about the wine incident, how he'd been disrespectful and rude. You know what she said? I should have just gotten him the wine to avoid any drama in front of his friends and talked to him about it later in private. She actually wanted me to apologize to him publicly for humiliating him. I told her there was no way in hell I was going to apologize and that she could take her precious son and get out of my apartment. I reminded her that he was living there rent-free, thanks to my mom, and he could at least show me some respect. Then I hung up and blocked her number. I was done. I was mentally preparing myself to call my mom and tell her Alex had to go when she beat me to it. She called me screaming about how I'd ruined her relationship with her sister. Apparently, when I told my aunt that Alex was living rent-free, it somehow translated to me never wanting him there in the first place and not treating them like family. Now my mom and aunt were in a huge fight, and guess who was getting blamed for it all? Yours truly. I tried to explain that she was the one who forced me into this whole situation, but she wasn't having it. She kept saying I was being selfish and should have kept my mouth shut. Even after I told her about my aunt's ridiculous demands, she still insisted I was in the wrong. It felt like we were talking in circles, and I finally just hung up on her. I've always loved my mom, but she can be so frustrating sometimes. She's always putting her family's needs before mine, and I'm at a point in my life where I'm just not going to put up with it anymore. Especially not from Alex and my aunt, who are both equally entitled. I do feel a little bad about rubbing it in their faces about Alex living rent-free. It wasn't entirely fair, even if my mom was paying. But honestly, at this point, I'm just so angry and frustrated with the whole situation. I needed to vent, and unfortunately, they got the brunt of it. The good news is, Alex moved out that same day. He didn't even say a word to me, just packed his stuff and left. I'm sure my aunt told him to, and honestly, I'm just relieved he's gone. No more man-child and his delusional mother to deal with. I haven't spoken to my mom since our fight. She wants me to apologize to Alex and my aunt, but I told her to forget it. I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do wrong. Everyone can just go to hell for all I care. I'm done with this drama. A week since my last update, and things have been interesting. My dad has been checking in on me every day. Bless his heart. He's the only sane one in this whole mess. This morning, he called and asked me to come home early because my mom wanted to talk. So, I did. When I got to my parents' place, my mom completely ignored me, like I wasn't even there. It was infuriating, especially since she was the one who wanted to see me. My dad just looked awkward and embarrassed. Even inside my apartment, she wouldn't speak to me directly. She kept trying to whisper things to my dad to relay to me. I finally lost it and yelled at her to just talk to me herself. We ended up having another huge argument. She went on and on about how I've become arrogant and selfish since I got a good job and moved out. Then she gave me an ultimatum. Apologize to Alex and my aunt, or be ostracized from the family forever. I was livid. I told her to get out of my apartment, but she started playing that card again about how she helped pay for it, so it wasn't entirely mine. I was about to tell her I'd pay her back, just get out, when my dad finally stepped in. He told my mom she couldn't keep using that against me because it was his money that paid for the apartment, not hers. My mom had been manipulating me this whole time. I was disappointed, but not surprised. My parents ended up arguing, and after about 15 minutes, they both left. My dad apologized for wasting my time. He was pretty angry with my mom, too. It wasn't the happy ending I was hoping for, but at least it was over. It's been a few hours, and I haven't heard from them since. I'm waiting for my dad to call and give me an update. I don't know what's going to happen now. My dad rarely ever stands up to my mom, so this whole thing could blow up in my face. I just hope it doesn't tear the family apart. Update. 4 days later, and my parents finally spoke again. My mom apologized to my dad, but he says she still needs time to come around and apologize to me. Apparently her ego took a major hit. It's fine, she can take all the time she needs. I'm focusing on work right now anyway. And get this, Alex texted me last night and apologized for his behavior. He said it was totally unacceptable. He can't get his mom to see that she's wrong, but honestly, I don't care about her anymore. I forgave Alex, and that's all that matters. So, there you have it, Reddit. A crazy family drama with a somewhat happy ending. I learned a lot about setting boundaries and standing up for myself. And hey, maybe Alex learned a thing or two about being a decent human being. Thanks for listening to my saga. I'm off to enjoy my peace and quiet, alone, finally. Story 2. In order to flaunt his affluent fiancé, my ex-boyfriend asked me to his wedding. Nevertheless, my significant other unexpectedly reversed the invitation. I am a 22-year-old woman who met Dylan, a 30-year-old man, when we were both working part-time at Starbucks. While he was repaying his student debts, I was still in college and saving money to move out of my parents' house permanently. His parents were unable to provide for him financially because of their excessive debt from gambling. We first became close by talking about our families, but after a while we discovered that we actually loved being together. 2 years later, I graduated and had saved up enough cash to live independently. Dylan, on the other hand, had been fighting for a while to leave his parents' house and was still having trouble paying off his school loans. I thus gave him a place to live with me, but he was unable to pay even his share of the rent due to the debt. He immediately agreed when I offered to pay 80% of the rent, leaving him to pay the other 20%. Although Dylan and I worked at different occupations, we divided the utility expenditures evenly aside from rent. I had a corporate career with a more laid-back schedule, but his job was more hands-on and required him to be on site for extended periods of time. My supervisor doesn't care if we work from home or the office as long as we consistently hit our monthly goals. Dylan was frequently unable to assist me around the house due to his job schedule. I thus had to handle the cooking, cleaning, washing, and dishes. I knew how difficult his job was, so I didn't mind doing it all. But since he was generally the last of us to eat, I did ask him to carry out the garbage. Sadly, Dylan would never remember to do it, so I was left to take out the garbage each morning. I can recall a weekend when I had to leave for work. Our entire apartment was in a state of chaos when I got home. Overflowing dishes, empty food packages, and chocolate wrappers littered the kitchen counter, which was a complete mess. The garbage had not been removed, and the washing had accumulated. I was furious, as you might understand. I was worn out from a hard day at work and simply wanted to relax. But after seeing how disorganized the place was, I was unable to unwind. In the hopes that Dylan would notice and value my efforts, I cleaned up all day. He hugged me when he finally got home and expressed how much he missed me, but he didn't even appear to notice the change in the house. He sat down to watch his game right away, which made me feel annoyed and undervalued. I started crying. I'm not sure if it was his lack of respect for me, his fatigue, or his insomnia, but I became aware of how little he thought of me for the first time. I pretended to be all right and told him that I was ready to go to bed before leaving, but he looked back and asked if something was wrong. He gave me a nod when I reminded him to take out the garbage. However, the rubbish was still there the following morning, as you can surely imagine. When he asked me for breakfast in the kitchen, I became irate. I informed him that if he wanted to eat, he could prepare meals for himself. I began shouting at him about how worthless he was around the home when he claimed that I was being impolite. He implored me not to be so theatrical and blinked as like he had done nothing wrong. After inhaling deeply, I questioned him about why he never took out the garbage. I forgot to do it, he informed me. After that, I asked him what he does around the house except returning home and enjoying a beer while watching TV. He began by saying that he deserved some leisure because he was constantly exhausted after work. I nodded in agreement with his assertions that he most certainly needs some downtime. However, what about me? I reminded him that I get home from work and begin preparing meals for the two of us. All I ask of him is to take out the garbage. I do the housework, washing, and iron his clothing for the week. Dylan went on to say that none of these things were ever requested of me. He went on to claim that his job was really difficult, and that, as his girlfriend, I should understand that I needed to support him. He even attempted to defend his actions by pointing out that his mother had done the same for his father, so it wasn't a huge problem. This absolutely enraged me when I heard it. Even though we weren't even married, I recognized that I was letting him walk all over me. Despite working so hard around the house, I gave him a direct look and informed him that I would not be helping him out around the house. We were on an equal footing, and I wasn't his mother. I instructed him to prepare his own meals, clean up after himself, wash his own laundry, iron his clothing, and take out his trash. Dylan began to object as his eyes grew wide, but I stopped him by raising a hand. There was more to it, I informed him. In addition, he had to vacate or pay half the rent. Dylan asked me where this was coming from after he was stunned. I told him that I was sick of putting in so much effort for him and never feeling valued. He clearly wanted to say more, but I was getting late for work, so I left the home. I had never established such firm limits in my life before, but I didn't feel bad about it. I followed through on my promise to do no more than clean up after myself. Watching him dash about the home in search of clean clothing or to straighten shirts before work was gratifying. He hoped I would take care of the garbage and clean the utensils for him, but I declined. In order to conveniently dispose of my trash without having to step into the kitchen, I chose to eat from takeout boxes even when the dishes began to stack and smell. He made many attempts to speak with me, urging me to be a good spouse and look after him, but I remained resolute and uncompromising. When it came time to pay the rent, I gave our landlord half of the total and told her Dylan would cover the other half. I resisted his attempts to fight with me at home, demanding that I pay 80% as before. I ended my assistance with him after reminding him that he never showed gratitude for me when I did. Despite his best efforts to justify himself, he was ultimately forced to give the landlord his portion of the rent. He never once expressed regret to me during this entire ordeal. He never took the time to sit down with me and apologize for not valuing the household chores I performed. He never admitted that I was correct about the circumstances, which was disheartening. In retrospect, I wish I had recognized him sooner for who he really was. As you may imagine, he blamed me for everything and tried to gaslight me into returning to my former habits, which made our arguments worse and worse over the course of the following several months. The last straw for Dylan seemed to be my promotion at work. That night was the worst argument we've ever had, so Dylan must have heard about it via one of our common friends, who also happens to be my workplace. After returning home intoxicated, Dylan woke me up and yelled at me to have a conversation. I asked him if we could chat tomorrow because he was suffering from a nasty hangover from the night of my party with my friends. But he insisted that he had something essential to tell me. I was so tired and irritated that I got up in bed to silence him and asked him why he had woken me up in the middle of the night. At this point, Dylan began intoxicatingly telling me about how he had met someone at work. He had taken me to one of his workplace parties, where I had seen the woman he was referring to, so I knew who she was. She was only a few years old and went by Bella. She was obviously very wealthy and the daughter of an industrialist. Her father's constant insistence that she required job experience was the sole reason she ever worked. Dylan went on to add that he was falling for her because, in contrast to me, he believed she was a genuine woman. I honestly didn't care or feel horrible, so I just stared at him emotionlessly. I should have heard this. We were essentially housemates by now, and I knew our relationship was ending nevertheless. I interrupted him in the middle of his sentence as he went on to discuss this relationship. I told Dylan that I was pleased for him, and that, to be honest, I didn't care if he saw another lady. I proposed that we end our relationship amicably, and that he leave our home right away. With a frown on his face, Dylan asked me whether I was envious of this new female. Telling him that I was happy he had met someone so I wouldn't feel bad about ending our relationship, I shook my head and smiled. When Dylan heard this, his face became red with rage. He inquired as to whether my confidence stemmed from my recent promotion at work. I informed him that our connection was unrelated to my advancement. We were no longer compatible, as I had come to learn during the previous few months. I clarified that we had essentially evolved from love partners to housemates. I could thus see why he desired to see someone else. Dylan began ranting at me, stating he detested contemporary women like me who flaunt their jobs, even though I thought he would be pleased to hear me say this. Because Bella just wanted to marry and have kids, he said. She was a far better lady. I remained composed and informed him that each woman has unique requirements in spite of his ranting. Bella obviously came from a wealthy household, so she might not be as concerned about her profession as I am, but I like my job. I also advised him to be with Bella if he want a lady like her. I advised him to leave our home as soon as possible, and that we shouldn't continue to quarrel over it. He questioned me how I could afford to pay the rent, as his eyes grew wide. I told him that I had been given a wage increase and could now afford the whole rent without a roommate. When he heard this, he started yelling at me, accusing me of attempting to brag in front of him. He explained to me that Bella was wealthier than I was, and even had a home that her father had purchased for her. He insisted that I become more complacent and change who I was. Then he mocked me by claiming that men ultimately want a housewife rather than a woman who could make more money than they did. I was sick of battling with him in the middle of the night, so I begged him to stop talking at this point. I informed him that he could sleep on the couch until the end of the month, after which he would have to move out. Even though I could hear him complaining, I chose to ignore him and resumed my slumber. Thankfully, Dylan began packing and gradually moving out his belongings throughout the course of the week. As I considered the possibility of someday owning this entire home, I began to feel thrilled. When I returned home on his last night, I was startled to discover Dylan and Bella seated on our couch. I gave him a questioning glance, and he told me that he wanted to show Bella his apartment because it was his final night here. Knowing that I would be returning, I found it incomprehensible that he would bring another lady into this home without my permission. I didn't want to be impolite to Bella since I believed that because this wasn't her fault, I shouldn't treat guests badly. To my astonishment, she treated me with disdain and didn't even care to acknowledge my presence when I greeted her pleasantly. I went to freshen up after deciding not to take it personally. Later in the kitchen, I was preparing spaghetti for myself. Bella arrived to fetch water. I felt uncomfortable as she stood there observing me for a minute. She looked at me with the same disdain as previously when I inquired if she wanted anything. In order to take the food back to the bedroom and dine in solitude, I made the decision to ignore her and keep cooking. I was ready to head downstairs after finishing my meal when I heard Dylan and Bella conversing. After dating someone who looked like me, Bella was telling Dylan how fortunate he was to have improved himself. Dylan laughed and agreed with her, and I froze in disbelief. Dylan answered something that broke my heart when Bella questioned him why he had ever fallen in love with me. Because I was naive enough to pay for our dates, he admitted that he had taken advantage of me. During college, we used to go out and lend him money. He also disclosed that he had saved a significant amount of money because I had covered almost half of the rent for the previous 2 years. I was shocked by what I had just heard. Although I had always assumed that he could have taken advantage of my kindness to pay over half of his rent, I was unaware that he had been taking advantage of me from the start. After that, Bella and him carried on discussing our connection and essentially ridiculed me in every manner possible. I was so embarrassed that I was on the verge of crying, but I didn't want them to see me like this. I returned upstairs in silence and sobbed into my pillow for the remainder of the night. When I woke up the following morning, Bella and Dylan had left. After he had removed his final belongings, it was formally transferred out. I realized that I was at last free of him when I took a stroll around the home in the daze. The sense of lateness I experienced upon realizing that he was finally no longer in my house or in my life is beyond words. I danced around the house and let out happy tears. After that, I started to clean the entire place to remove all traces of him. I've had a great time living alone for the past 2 weeks. What Bella and Dylan had said about me no longer mattered to me. Everything was going smoothly until 2 months later, when a mutual buddy told me at work that Dylan and Bella were getting married. It all felt too abrupt, and I was surprised. When our buddy showed me their engagement photos, they seemed like a happy couple. I was a little sad that Dylan had taken advantage of me for so long, but I also knew that I would never have been content with him. I was therefore happy that he had discovered someone who could bring him joy. When I returned home that evening and looked in my mailbox, I discovered an unexpected wedding invitation. When I recognized that it was from Dylan and Bella, my eyes widened in surprise. Before I opened the invitation and noticed that he had scrawled something in the corner written side, I was beginning to believe that it might have been an error or that he had invited me merely out of courtesy. The card said, "I want you to come to my wedding so you can see how grand my life with Bella is going to be." Slowly, it dawned on me that he had invited me purely to flaunt his newfound wealth, his marriage, and his wealthy partner. I inhaled deeply as I tried to figure out why he would even send me such an invitation when all I had done was look after him. I knew I had to get petty with him because the year's worth of resentment and frustration I had been holding inside kept erupting. I sent in a yes RSVP with a +1. I was determined to make Dylan regret ever inviting me, and I had a plan in the works. After turning on my laptop, I started looking through Bella's social media accounts. I looked through every single photo she had ever shared on social media. Fortunately, I was able to locate what I was searching for. Bella and her ex-boyfriend Jake had broken up just 6 months prior. They had obviously been together for a very long time because she had multiple posts with him, and their photos went all the way back to high school. I sent a friend request to Jake for my profile, and when he accepted, I sent him a message. To my surprise, he responded, and we started talking. I was upfront with him about my identity as Dylan's ex, and told him about my plan to invite him as my +1 to their wedding. He seemed intrigued and curious as to why I was reaching out to him, but I explained everything to him. Over the next few weeks, Jake opened up about how Bella had cheated on him multiple times, and her latest affair had been with Dylan. This was news to me because I had no idea about this. He continued to reveal how Bella was always into older men, hence he wasn't surprised much when she announced that she was in love with Dylan while they were still dating. As you can imagine, they had a pretty bad breakup, and he had blocked her from everywhere, despite her telling him that they should remain friends. From the way he talked about Bella, it seemed like he was still in love with her. I also told Jake about my own experience with Dylan and how he had used me for all those years. I poured my heart out to him, describing everything that Dylan had put me through and how Bella and Dylan had made fun of me. Jake was shocked to hear about the way Dylan had treated me and spoken about me after hearing everything. Jake eventually consented to accompany me. I felt excited thinking of the look on my ex and Bella's faces when they saw me attend their wedding with Jake on the day of the wedding. As expected, Dylan's eyes widened when he saw me walking in with my special guest. He must have immediately recognized Jake as Bella's ex. We disregarded his reactions and pretended to find our allotted seats. Dylan rushed up to me and aggressively muttered, asking why I was here with Bella's ex, but I merely smiled. He could not create a scene in front of everyone and had to unwillingly go back up to the aisle, looking me furiously. When it was time for the bride to make her entry, everyone rose up from their chairs. Bella looked gorgeous in her white floor-length gown as she walked down the aisle with her father on her side. The ceremony proceeded successfully, and the celebrations continued to the reception area. Bella may have gone to change because she was wearing a different clothing when she reached the location. Bella had not spotted me or Jake yet when she suddenly saw Jake sat next to me. She froze in her tracks. Bella turned to look at me and then glanced at him, possibly still perplexed. She asked Jake what he was doing with me. I smiled and informed her that I had asked him as a guest so we could show our support for her marriage. She looked angry and asked Jake if we were dating now. Jake stayed mute since this was an absurd thing to ask anyhow, and Bella's face began becoming crimson with rage. Jake asked her if he could speak with her alone since he didn't want her to raise a scene, and she nodded gravely, casting me a venomous scowl. They went out, and I turned to stare at Dylan, observing our encounter with hawk eyes. Dylan seemed worried, but he was unable to do anything but sit there and act as if nothing was wrong. Everyone appeared to be having a good time as the celebration went on. However, the bride was missing to be located an hour later. A few patrons began to take note and murmur to one another. When Bella's father became worried, he asked one of the bridesmaids to go see how she was doing. The bridesmaid ran up with a message in her hands a minute later. In front of everyone, she declared that Bella and her ex-boyfriend had fled. Everybody was standing there. The bridesmaid was shocked and kept reading the message, in which Bella confessed that she had made a grave mistake by marrying Dylan, and that meeting Jake had rekindled all of her old sentiments. Dylan stood there looking vulnerable and ashamed as the visitors were further taken aback by the news. I was also astonished, since I thought I had brought Jake along to annoy Dylan. It never occurred to me that things would end up this way. Dylan appeared to be about to rip the head off someone. Bella's parents sincerely apologized for the incident and asked everyone to take a leave of absence. I saw Dylan, who used to be arrogant and pompous, stand there by himself, utterly shocked by Bella's choice. I do feel somewhat bad because of the wedding. However, I can't help but feel pleased that Dylan's attempt to make me look bad didn't work out so well. The occasion, which was supposed to demonstrate his victory over me, had turned into the scene of his demise. Aita for spoiling my ex's wedding by bringing a special visitor there as a +1. Since I shared my tale, I've had a range of responses to it. Many of you concur that I made the correct decision. I may have gone too far, according to some of you. I should make it clear that I never intended to ruin my ex's wedding, and I never mentioned it to Jake. What Bella and Jake discussed in private is unknown to me. For Bella to abruptly call off the wedding. Since my ex had first invited me in the hopes of flaunting his marriage to a wealthy woman like Bella, I just wanted to be spiteful with him. Bella's choice to end her marriage was entirely independent of me. I've texted Jake to ask him what occurred, and I'll provide an update as soon as he responds. Jake contacted me for the second update. He essentially expressed his gratitude for me taking him to the wedding in a lengthy text message that he gave me yesterday. He informed me that Bella was scheduled to travel on a honeymoon with Dylan, but he and she had already taken it. They had also spoken with her parents, who were quite concerned about her. He told me that he will be seeing me shortly to personally explain everything. Dylan, meantime, had been contacting me constantly since the wedding. He blamed me for the breakdown of his marriage in a series of harsh text messages and phone calls. I never responded to him, and I had no desire to converse with him. I was aware that I had nothing to do with Bella and Jake's joint escape. Dylan chose to arrive to my house today, as he knew I would be home during the weekend. I first requested him to go and wouldn't open the door. Until he spoke to me, he kept shouting that he was not leaving. I stood outside my door and told him that he was not let inside, allowing him to say anything he wanted to me. I then opened the door a little. Dylan began screaming at me, accusing me of ruining his life. He had apparently already given notice at work, believing that after marrying someone as wealthy as Bella, he would never need to return to work. Why did I ever bring Jake to their wedding? He questioned me furiously. I decided to tell him that I had overheard all he said to Bella that evening, because I was becoming mad at him for blaming me. When I informed him that I knew he had been using me to pay for our dates and his rent for all the years we dated, his eyes widened in surprise. He obviously didn't respect me, even though I assured him that I did all those things because I loved him. I assured him that I never bothered to become involved in his relationship and that I didn't care that he had cheated on me with Bella. It was only when he wanted to show me the life he was about to have with his wealthy partner and asked me to their wedding. That was the tipping point for me. I informed him that I wasn't accountable for anything, therefore he had no right to come to my house and shout at me. He should be upset with Bella because she was an adult and made the decision to leave him. Dylan began to scream back that I shouldn't blame him for the past, that it wasn't his fault, and that I was too innocent to see how he had been taking advantage of me for so long. As he went on to explain to me how Bella was meant to transform his life and how he might have had it all, I sneered. He finally admitted that I had spoiled his opportunity to flirt and woo Bella, despite his best efforts. I no longer wanted to hear his statements since they were so vile at this point. I thus requested that he vacate my property. If not, I would contact the police. I pulled out my phone and dialed in front of him after he informed me that I would never dare to do that. He instantly stepped back a few paces and urged me not to get all up because he was leaving. I vowed to myself that this would be the last time I saw him before I closed the door. I have now told my family about this occurrence and blocked him from all websites. In order to document his actions and lodge a formal complaint against him the next time he visits, I want to change the locks on my house and place a camera on my door. Update 3. My previous update was a month ago. I've been so busy at work that I didn't have time to inform everyone, so they sent me 100 messages asking if Jake and I had ever met. I'm glad to say that we did at last. A week ago, Jake said he was ready to talk to me and invited me to lunch. Bella was seated behind him when I arrived at the location. Thinking she was come to pick a fight with me again, I instantly prepared myself. To my amazement, though, she welcomed me with a warm grin and a kind word when she spotted me. Jake reassured me that she was only coming to apologize, even if I wasn't entirely sure why she was here. Bella nodded and really apologized for her previous words against me. She continued by sharing her tale with Dylan with me. She told me that because of their lengthy work schedule, Dylan would always treat her well and offer her a lot of attention at work. Dylan would constantly gripe about me and our relationship during the many times they spent together. He would express his dissatisfaction and wish he had a more attractive girl like Bella. Every time he gave her a praise, she felt gratified and began to feel sorry for him. During a difficult time with Jake, she became overly passionate and had a brief affair with Dylan. Dylan persuaded her to end their relationship after that, claiming that Jake was unworthy of her. Dylan would constantly message her, telling her that she was ideal for him and that they could live together. She finally ended her relationship with Jake because she felt bad for cheating on him. Despite their apparent age difference, she believed she might be content with Dylan. Bella went on to say that she was jealous of my independence and felt nervous when she saw me, since I didn't really need a man to look after me. She expressed regret for offending me. I acknowledged her point of view and continued by telling her how hard I had worked my entire life to get to this point in my career. Her eyes were downcast as she nodded seriously. After that, I asked her to tell me what had transpired at her wedding to Dylan. She went on to say that she was surprised to see Jake when I took him to the wedding. She had never felt the same way about him, but as she looked into his face, she realized how much she still loved him. For Dylan. According to Jake, they discovered they had the same feelings for one another after talking about it in private at the wedding. They therefore made the decision to flee together after Bella's message to her family. Since that day, they had been together and were much in love. I was also told that she had discussed this with her parents, who initially became quite upset, but ultimately agreed to help her. She would shortly petition for an annulment from Dylan. Even though I wasn't totally comfortable hearing this, I was glad that at least 2 individuals were content following the terrible occurrences. I could see Bella and Jake were beaming at one another. We continued our lunch conversation before departing. I haven't spoken to either of them much since that chat, and I don't want to be involved in their drama. I intend to continue working hard at my profession and concentrating on myself. I hope Dylan can finally learn from his mistakes and refrain from pursuing partners for financial gain in the future, but I'm not sure what will happen with him. Story 3. I was astonished when my fiancé broke up with me, so I kicked her out of my house and returned the ring. With this, where do I even begin? To be honest, I'm still struggling to understand why my ex-fiancée Laura suddenly broke up with me. I believed that our relationship was going well. We did experience some ups and downs, but who doesn't? Correct? We had spent 4 years together. We had planned to get married, and then all of a sudden, not that term, but you get the idea. We should end our relationship, she says. And why? My work. Yes, you read correctly. My fucking work at the restaurant my family owns. I understand now. My schedule is a little strange. She's been off work for around 3 or 4 hours by the time I get home from my evening job. This isn't news, though. Since day one, she has been aware of this. Similar to before we were even engaged. She was aware of my disorganized schedule. I put in late hours at work, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Tuesdays. From 4:30 until 9 p.m. I'm there. Saturdays and Fridays a bit later. It's not like I'm absent, though. Before my shift began, we had Sundays, a few mornings, and even the majority of Saturdays. Laura started talking about how we don't get to see each other very often, and that I should get a new job because she's sick of waiting for me to come home every night. But I didn't think it was that big of a concern. She starts work at 7:30 a.m. She leaves much earlier than I do, till 6 p.m., and I suppose she didn't enjoy being left alone during that period. I always believed we were making things work, even if it's awful. I even suggested that we collaborate at the restaurant. It seemed like a really good concept to me. We could get together more often, we would have more money saved up for the wedding, and she wouldn't be bored waiting around. However, no. She quickly shot that down, cited her discomfort with working for my parents. All okay, great. All right. In any case, I appreciated that. Because I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable or anything, I didn't push it. But every few weeks after that, she continued to bring up my employment. The question was, when will you find something better? Alternatively, I failed to see how this can be sustained. I became irritated because really, how often do I have to express that I'm okay with my current situation? Working for my family brings me great joy. Although the hours might be lengthy at times, the restaurant has been in the family for many years and is well worth the wait. She just sat me down one evening and said, "Ethan, I can't do this anymore." At first I assumed she was joking, but she was dead serious. She informed me that she didn't see how we could ever get married if I didn't change careers. I was really taken by surprise. I made an effort to reassure her that we could work things out. She was not having any of it, even if she thought there could be a way to better balance things. "I need more from you," she said. "Whatever it takes, we need to put in more time, effort, and dedication to our future." I assured her of my commitment. We were actually organizing a wedding after all. "How much more dedicated can you get then?" She said that I didn't give enough thought to her needs, which truly hurt. "Excuse me, but in order for us to save money for the future, I've been working late shifts. I'm not neglecting her or going out to parties. I work for us." Apparently, that doesn't count for anything, as I had assumed. She then dumped the entire thing. That was a stomach punch, and perhaps we should just be friends. We weren't even fighting. There was no shouting, no major altercation. She was the only one sitting quietly, as if she had spent weeks practicing this exchange in her mind. "Are you serious?" I questioned her directly. "Is my employment the reason you wish to discard all of this?" "It's not just your job," she said with courage. "You don't appear to want to change for us, and that's the problem." I became angry at that point. She was aware of my schedule prior to our engagement, I reminded her. Why in the world would she consent to marry me in the first place if it was such an issue for her? She became defensive and claimed that she believed I would eventually get over it and find something else, such as, "Working hard at a family business is something you need to grow out of, but since when?" I won't tell lies. I was deceived. She essentially acknowledged that she had been waiting for me to change into a different person, and she left when it didn't occur. I simply stayed away from her after that chat. I was unable to even gaze at her. The last thing I wanted to do was return home and sit in the same house as someone who no longer wanted to be with me, so I stayed late at work every night. Here's the problem, though. She stayed. As I had assumed, you would start looking for a new place to stay after breaking up with someone, especially if you were engaged. Not at all. She continued to act as though nothing had changed, as if we had just moved in together or something. She was always there when I got home, lounging on the couch and watching TV as if nothing had happened. I felt ill from it. To be honest, how could she end our relationship and continue to live with me as if nothing had happened? I eventually told her one evening, "Laura, you need to move out. This isn't working for me, and we're no longer together. Get this too." I appeared like I had two heads when she stared at me. "Are you serious?" she said. "Are you throwing me out?" I said to her, "Yes, I am. We are no longer getting married. What use does it serve to live together then?" By claiming that she had nowhere to go and that I was being cruel for forcing her to go, she attempted to guilt-trip me. I had just finished at that moment. She could remain with her folks until she worked things out, I assured her. To top it all off, I requested the return of the ring. "You believe I might have smacked her?" I handed it to her, and I couldn't just ask for it back, she said in a panic. "That ring was for our wedding, and since we're not getting married, I want it back," I informed her bluntly. She accused me of being avaricious, said that if I truly loved her, I could purchase another one, and added that attempting to evict her after everything we had gone through was rude. I was unable to even protest at that point. All I wanted was for her to leave. Laura had to move out after I told her so. Things quickly became weird. You would assume that she would have just packed her things and gone, correct? However, not at all. She lingered as though she was anticipating something. I initially assumed she was simply taking her time and attempting to decide where to go. It's not as if she had no other choices. She had friends she could stay with and her parents live close by, but she chose to remain. I have to admit that the days following the split were the most unpleasant of my life. In the same house, we were living like strangers. On one side of the room, she would sit. I'd be on the opposite side, and there was only this strange quiet. Being the first to speak was something no one desired. She would be there watching TV or doing her thing when I got home from work. However, this enormous elephant seemed to be seated between us. We didn't want to deal with it either. Then things worsened. One day when I get home, Laura and my mother are seated at the kitchen table. Yes, you read correctly. Mom. It seems that she had summoned my mother without informing me. They are enjoying coffee as I come in, as if nothing is out of the ordinary. I was really perplexed. My mother says, "Ethan, we need to talk," after glancing at me. Even though I was already irritated, I made an effort to remain composed. It's my mother, after all. Laura begins to give me her side of the story as soon as I sit down with her. She claims that she has nowhere to go, and that it's unfair that I'm asking her to move out so quickly after the split. Then, with all due respect, my mother begins to offer that perhaps we might come to an agreement and that Laura might remain a little while longer while she works things out. It seemed unbelievable to me. Such as, after a moment of staring at them, I said, "Mom, we're not together anymore. Why should I allow her to be here? It works well with my mom, who is always the peacekeeper. She needs time to come to her senses. You know, getting up and moving isn't simple." I was furious within, but I tried to remain composed. Yes, it's difficult, but we ended our relationship. Why should I have to put up with this when we are no longer a couple? You've had time, I remarked, glancing at Laura. Almost a week has passed. You must go. Naturally, Laura then breaks out in tears and claims that she believed I was superior than this, because she didn't think I would simply throw her away like garbage. She even breaks down in front of my mother, and I think it was an attempt to paint me as the villain. At this moment, my mother tries to defuse the situation by suggesting that Ethan give her a little more time. You two spent a lot of time together. Simply ending situations like this is difficult. What I was hearing was unbelievable. My own mother was siding with Laura. Even though I adore my mother, she did not make this call. "This isn't your business, Mom," I informed her bluntly. "I'm done with Laura. She must leave." Laura then goes on the ultimate guilt trip. "If you truly loved me, you wouldn't be doing this," she adds, staring me in the eyes. "I believed you were interested in me. That really got to me, man. Although I didn't want to be the villain in this situation, how long was I allowed to continue? It was she, not me, who put an end to things." She's now attempting to reframe it as though I'm the one acting irrationally. I didn't back down, though. I informed her that although I do care, we are no longer together. It's not your house either. You must go on. My mom simply sat there looking very sad, as if I had ruined everything, while Laura rushed out of the room. "I just hope you're doing the right thing," she continued, giving me this look. For a long, that bothered me. Was I being too severe, for example? Did I need to give her more time? However, I then reflected on how she had been prolonging this, attempting to remain in the house, and making me feel uneasy in my own home. I also knew I wasn't at fault. She was only attempting to take advantage of the circumstance to make herself the victim. This was my home and my territory. When I get home the next day, Laura has left. She's not home, but her belongings are still there. I initially felt a great sense of relaxation. I thought perhaps she had finally made the decision to move out, but it was simply a game. She returns late that evening, behaving as if nothing had occurred. She remained silent with me. I simply walked to the bedroom and closed the door. By now, I was finished. This was too much for me to handle any longer. I warned her via text that I would begin the eviction process if she didn't remove her belongings and leave by the end of the week. It may sound harsh, but what else could I have done? I didn't want to live in this strange, chaotic scenario for another week, and she wasn't paying attention to me. Get this too. She responded to her text. "It's unbelievable how you're acting. At least we could be friends," I thought. "However, you're acting as though I'm a complete stranger." It dawned on me then that she would never leave unless I made her. She was attempting to manipulate me into caving, perhaps in the hopes that I would apologize or something, and implore her to remain. I wasn't going to do that, though. Not after all that she had done to me. At last, by the end of the week, Laura began packing her belongings. Every time she moved a box, it was like this huge dramatic scene. She would huff and puff, acting as though she wanted my sympathy, but I didn't. I didn't want to let her stay because she didn't feel like moving, even though I felt bad that things ended the way they did. Then the ring appeared. The ring, damn it. I thought that conversation was over, but it wasn't. "I can't believe you're actually asking for the ring back," she says, trying to pull it off once more. "I did care about you, you know. This time I didn't even argue. I just informed her that we would not be getting married. The wedding ring was for the occasion. No ring, no wedding." She looked at me as if I were the world's biggest jerk, but she finally gave it back, and honestly, when she handed it over, I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders. It felt as though I could finally move on, and the last chapter of our relationship was coming to an end. Now, it's been a few days since she left, and honestly, I feel better than I have in months. Not having her around is strange, but it's also liberating. She doesn't have to try to guilt trip me every 5 seconds, and I don't have to be careful around her. Do I miss her? Yeah, a little, but not enough to go back to that mess. Sometimes things just need to end, and dragging them out only makes it worse. Update 1. So after Laura finally moved out, I thought things would settle down, right? Like we're done. She's gone. I can finally get back to normal. But man, I was wrong. Things got weird real fast. First of all, I didn't even realize how much stuff she had left behind. It was like every room in the house had some random item of hers. I'm talking about clothes, books, even her toothbrush was still in the bathroom. I wasn't going to touch it at first, but then a couple of days went by and I was like, okay, this is getting ridiculous. So I started packing up her things and putting them in boxes. Figured I'd drop them off at her parents' house or something, be done with it. But then while I was going through her stuff, I found something that threw me off. I don't even know how to explain it, but I found this notebook she had hidden in one of her drawers. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who snoops through people's stuff, but, she left it here, right? So I opened it, and it was like this whole diary of complaints about me and our relationship. Stuff like, "Ethan never listens to me. He doesn't care about my feelings. Why can't he just get a normal job like other guys?" It was like reading a list of everything she hated about me. And I got to be honest, it messed with my head. I know relationships aren't perfect, but seeing all of that written out page after page was rough. I had no idea she felt that way. I thought we had our issues, but I didn't think it was that bad. And the worst part? She wrote about how she'd been thinking about breaking up with me for months, but was just waiting for the right time. Like, what does that even mean? The right time to end someone's life plans? I couldn't believe she was sticking around, pretending everything was fine, when in reality she was already halfway out the door. So after reading all that, I just felt this weird combination of anger and sadness. Like, I knew the relationship was over, but finding that notebook made it so much more real. It wasn't just a breakup because of work schedules. It was like she had been mentally checked out for a long time and I didn't even see it. I sat there for a while, just staring at the pages, trying to figure out if I missed something or if I'd been completely blind this whole time. And then it hit me. She never really wanted to marry me. She just wanted me to be someone I wasn't. She wanted me to quit my job, change my life, and become this ideal version of myself that didn't exist. No wonder she broke up with me. I could never live up to what she wanted. I put the notebook away and tried to distract myself, but it kept eating at me. I couldn't stop thinking about everything she wrote. It was like this nagging voice in the back of my head, reminding me that maybe I wasn't good enough. That's the thing about breakups. They make you question everything. You start overanalyzing every conversation, every argument, every time you said, "I love you," and wonder if any of it meant what you thought it did. A few days later, Laura texts me. I hadn't heard from her since she moved out. And honestly, I wasn't expecting to, but her text wasn't what I thought it'd be. She didn't want to check in or talk about the breakup. Not at all. She wanted to come by and pick up a few things, like, "Okay, you've already been gone for over a week, and now you want to come back and get your stuff." I agreed. but I told her to give me a heads up before she came over. I didn't want any surprises. The last thing I needed was to walk in and find her there without warning. So she comes over, and it's as awkward as you'd imagine. She barely looked at me when she walked in, just went straight to grabbing her stuff like she couldn't wait to get out of there. I was standing in the living room trying to act normal, but the whole situation felt so off, like we'd shared this life together. We've been planning a wedding, and now it was like she was just a stranger coming to collect her things. But then something weird happened. As she was grabbing her stuff, she stopped and looked at me for the first time in days. We actually made eye contact, and she just stood there like she wanted to say something, but couldn't get the words out. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to say something. So I asked, "Is everything okay?" And then she said something I'll never forget. She goes, "I didn't want it to end like this." I didn't know how to respond. What was I supposed to say? We're already here. It's already over. I just stood there, not knowing what to say. And she looked at me like she was waiting for me to fix everything, but I couldn't. How was I supposed to fix something that had been broken for months, maybe even years? And I didn't even recognize it. She grabbed the last of her stuff and left, without saying another word. The door closed, and just like that, she was gone again. It was this odd mix of relief and grief, like I was pleased the whole ordeal was finally done. But at the same time, it seemed like this enormous chapter of my life had ended, and I wasn't ready for it. After she departed, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I phoned up a therapist. I know, sounds dramatic, but I couldn't shake the thought that maybe there was something wrong with me. Maybe I overlooked something important in our connection, or maybe I just wasn't made out for this whole long-term commitment thing. I wasn't sure what to anticipate, but I believed talking to someone outside of the situation could help. Turns out, talking to someone who doesn't know you or your ex is really very useful. The therapist didn't offer me all the answers or anything, but she helped me understand that I wasn't the only one to blame for what occurred. Relationships are two-sided, and as much as I messed up in certain areas, Laura had her role in it too. I wasn't faultless, but I wasn't the villain in this narrative either. One thing that particularly resonated with me from those sessions was the concept that sometimes individuals fall in love with the image of someone, not who they really are. And looking back, I suppose that's what Laura did with me. She wanted me to be this version of myself that didn't exist, and she began to check out when I didn't turn into that person. So here I am, feeling better a few months later. Better, but not terrific. I still occasionally think about her, and yes, I do wonder what may have been. However, I am also aware that things most likely would have become worse if she had stayed. The fact is that we weren't meant to be together. The lesson, I suppose, is that sometimes things end for a reason. It aches, and it's awful. However, it's preferable than trying something that will never work in the long term. The second update. So I assumed that was it once Laura permanently left. Is that the end of the story? As it happens, things weren't as finished as I had assumed. It wasn't until I began receiving messages from friends we had in common that I realized how many loose ends there were. Yes, that is one of those circumstances. It was sluggish at first. Every now and then, I would receive a text from someone asking how I was doing, which was all right, but then they would make these little remarks. As Laura mentioned, she is having a lot of difficulties. Or, have you gotten a message from her? I initially dismissed it. I assumed that folks were only being considerate and attempting to gauge our current situation following the separation. However, after then, the communications tone began to shift. People were behaving as though I was the one who abruptly threw her out. As I sit here, I wonder if Laura hasn't told anyone that she ended our relationship. Apparently not. The next thing I know, several of her pals are sending me lengthy, guilt-tripping texts. People I hardly know are accusing me of being cold-hearted for forcing her to move out and demanding the return of the ring. Excuse me? She ended our relationship. I wasn't going to continue living with my ex-fiancé and seem like nothing was wrong while she was out there accusing me of being the villain. However, she claims that I am the one who was too indifferent to try to resolve the issue. I'm currently in this strange predicament where she's playing the victim, and I'm perceived as the antagonist of the narrative. The speed at which things may change is quite astounding. I had to start telling people the truth, and each time I did, it was just so draining. For example, why must I even defend myself? After a week or two, I believe that things are finally coming to an end. I began to unwind once I stopped receiving the texts and heard from others regarding Laura. Naturally, though, that was short-lived. My phone buzzes one evening while I'm attempting to relax at home after a hard shift at the restaurant while watching TV. Jenna, Laura's best friend, sent the SMS. Now, I never really got along with Jenna. She had a habit of talking into Laura's ear and giving her instructions, agitating the pot. You are aware. I knew it wouldn't be good when I saw her name appear on my phone. It's a book, as I discovered when I opened the message. Jenna never stops talking about how Laura is upset, and how I should have done more to try to save the relationship because I didn't fight for it. You're meant to work as a team, and you simply gave up on her, she even claimed. I was so furious that I could hardly react. However, I did. I replied to her text, keeping things brief and straightforward. Laura ended our relationship, I said. It was she who requested to go. If someone doesn't want to remain, I won't beg them to. Jenna didn't stop there, of course. In an attempt to guilt-trip me, she kept messaging me about Laura's pain and need for time, and perhaps things might have turned out differently if I had reached out. However, I refused to accept it. I informed her bluntly that we were done. It's finished. Give it up. I didn't hear from her again after that. Meanwhile, for a time. Then one day, when I'm at the restaurant attempting to survive the dinner rush, my mother approaches me with this expression. Moms give you that expression when they have something to say, but are unsure of how to express it. It was one of those indeed. Ethan, I spoke with Laura today, she continues, dragging me aside. I just looked at her, wondering why. Well, she called me, my mother says, stated that she wanted to check in and apologize for the way things ended. Now, when your ex calls your mom to see how you're doing, I'm not sure about you. That is a serious warning sign, I informed my mother. Look, whether she's sorry or not doesn't matter to me. We're finished. She isn't phoning you for any purpose. I know, but she seemed genuinely distressed. My mom sighed. She said she didn't want things to end this way, and that she now feels like you despise her. Once more, here we go. I had to retell the entire story to my mother, stating that Laura was the one who canceled, that she has been telling others that I expelled her, and that I just want to move on. My mother was clearly conflicted, but she eventually understood. Although she promised to stop getting involved, I must admit that it was annoying that I even had to have that discussion. Then everything began to settle down. Actually, Jenna didn't get back to me. I finally felt like I could move on once Laura stopped phoning my mother. In an attempt to regain some semblance of routine, I even resumed going out for drinks with my pals after work. However, something more occurred, right as I believed that things were finally calming down. One of my friends, Mark, pulled me aside when we were at the pub one evening and said, "Hey man, you're not going to like this." But the other day, I ran into Laura. I was with a man, I'll be honest with you now. When he said that, I didn't expect to feel anything, but for some reason, I felt as though I knew we were done. However, she had already moved on after hearing that. It was difficult. Who was Mark? I questioned. He said that although they appeared to be very near, he was unsure. I only needed to hear that. The days that followed were strange. I couldn't stop thinking about it, even though I didn't text Laura or anything. I felt as though this chapter of my life was finally done, not because I wanted her back. Since she was moving on, I suppose I had to follow suit. In retrospect, I see that Laura most likely checked out long before our breakup. For her, it wasn't sudden, which may be why everything seemed so abrupt when it happened. She had been thinking about it, planning it, and by the time she finished, she was almost out the door. It took me some time to come to terms with it. Admitting that someone you cared about quit caring long before you did is difficult. But what do you know? It's for the best in the end. Trying to force it would have only made things worse since we weren't meant to be together. I'm concentrating on me now. I'm not in a rush to go back into the dating scene, and I'm not seeking for a relationship anytime soon. All I'm trying to do is rediscover the joy of the small things, spending time with friends, concentrating on my career, and re-establishing my desired level of living. Regarding Laura, I want the best for her. I do. However, I'm beyond the drama, manipulation, and guilt trips. I'm going on. The third update. I'm finally feeling like I can breathe again after several months. To be honest, I'm just relieved that it's finished since it's been quite the journey. However, I encountered a final curve just when I believed that everything was behind me. Surprise, I mean, yes, so something else had to happen. Naturally, this is what transpired. One day I was working at the restaurant going about my daily business when Tom, one of our regulars, entered. Tom has been frequenting the restaurant for years and is now an elderly man. Very cordial with my family. Anytime he's there, he always talks to my parents. However, he has this strange expression on his face this time. "Hey, Ethan, I saw Laura the other night," he continues, dragging me aside. Right now I'm thinking, well, whatever. People frequently see Laura. What's fresh? Then he gives this small tidbit. "She was with Chris, your cousin." My brain briefly shorted out, I promise. I'm thinking, what? Chris. No, Chris and I are, after all, family. We were raised together. He would never be spending time with my ex-fiancé, correct? Tom was dead serious, though. He leaves. Yes, dude. Downtown, they were at that new pub. It seemed really near, if you understand. I was at a loss for words. Although I had some doubts, I also thought, well, this is Laura we're talking about, so who knows? I told Tom I'd look into it later, and kind of shrugged it off, but I was seething within. I was unsure of my thoughts. Why would Chris be spending time with Laura, of all people? And why was I not informed? I did what any guy would do, of course. I got right to the point. That evening, I texted Chris to find out what was going on. I said something like, "Hey man, I heard you were out with Laura the other night," as I didn't want to accuse him of anything. "What is happening there?" He took long to reply, and when he did, his answer was, well, let's just say, not what I had been hoping for. "Yes," he says, "we have been spending some time together. Since I knew it would be awkward doesn't even begin to describe it. I didn't want to tell you. My ex-fiancé thought it was a little odd that my cousin, who is my blood relative, was hanging out with him behind my back. I was furious, really furious. I fired back. What the heck, dude? You were unable to alert me?" He made an effort to downplay it by claiming that they were only friends and that it wasn't a huge problem. Nothing major. Come on, though. We all understand what it means to be friends only, particularly when your cousin and your ex are involved. I told him bluntly that I felt deceived and that I wasn't buying it. He began to backtrack, claiming that he had no intention of it happening and that they had simply run into each other one evening, after which things sort of got out of hand. It seemed like they had been conversing for a few weeks. Weeks. That was something I had to dwell with for a long. How on earth do you ever comprehend such a thing? Laura was no longer the only concern. It has to do with family. Someone with whom I grew up and whom I trusted thought it was cool to begin hanging out with my ex as if nothing were wrong. To be honest, it stung more than I anticipated. Laura herself texted me a few days later. She made no attempt to ease into it. Simply strike me with, "Hello, I've heard that you're angry about Chris and me. Can we have a conversation?" I was unwilling to speak with her. I didn't want to listen to her justifications, or anything else she was going to say. However, I also required closure. I had to know why she felt this was okay. I so consented to meet despite my better judgment. When we were still together, we used to frequent this coffee shop, which is where we first met. By the way, that was a bad idea. Too many memories. In any case, she sits down and starts talking about how she didn't intend to upset me, how she and Chris bonded, and how she didn't want our relationship to become strange. I wanted to go, but I sat there trying to remain composed. "It's not about you two clicking," I informed her. "Respect is at issue. After we broke up, you're now spending time with my cousin. You didn't consider it a potential issue?" She told me that she didn't anticipate this happening, because it simply did, and that she wished to avoid causing me harm. However, I didn't believe it. I told her directly, "You made a decision. You can't come back into my life and pretend that everything is okay now." There was no progress in the talk. She made an effort to defend it. I refused to accept it. And both of us left feeling much more irritated. At least I was able to express my feelings, even if I didn't feel much better. I banned her number after that. She was no longer someone I wanted to deal with. We also had it out with Chris. A few days later, he tried to make amends by calling me. I didn't hold back, but I let him speak. He betrayed my confidence, I told him. Additionally, you don't simply recover from it. I wasn't ready to forgive him, even though he stated he didn't mean for things to get nasty and apologized. Is it family? There is a line that you should never cross. He also crossed it. Both of them have been people I've avoided ever since. Chris still occasionally texts me, but I haven't replied. I might be able to move past it eventually, but I need room right now. Laura, on the other hand, is permanently gone from my life. To be honest, I have no idea if she is still with Chris, and I don't give a damn. They are free to do what they choose. I'm finished. Taking a look back, the entire experience taught me a lot. About people in general, not just about relationships. They go and do something like this after you believe you know them and can trust them. It disrupts your mental state. Ultimately, though, you must look after yourself. Although you have no control over what other people do, you do have influence over how you react to it. And my reaction at the moment is to go. I have my own life to lead, and my own objectives to pursue. Furthermore, I'm not going to allow this drama bring me down any longer.